at a press event bursting with cameras, billionaire CEO Jonathan Hargrove collapsed. Hidden in his pocket, a photo of 4 kids, no one recognized. Days later, his name was being erased from his own company by a charming new CEO with darker motives. Then, out of nowhere, 4 strangers appeared, with one mission and nothing left to lose. What they did next stunned the world, but first, let's go back to the beginning. The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving streaks of water clinging to the mansion's towering glass windows, softening the harsh edges of its modern architecture. Inside, Jonathan Hargrove stood alone in his spotless kitchen, staring at a cold cup of coffee, untouched. The silence around him was complete, sterile, just like the life he had built. Every surface gleamed, every room was climate-controlled and curated, but no warmth had ever settled into the bones of the place. It was a house, never a home. His routine had always been precise. Wake at 5, run 5 miles on the treadmill, read the international markets, review performance reports by 6, eat a protein bar, scan shareholder emails, head to the office by 7. He ran his life like he ran his empire, efficiently, surgically, without pause for sentiment. But lately, the numbers no longer satisfied. The echo of his footsteps through empty hallways no longer sounded like victory. That night, with the television playing in the background of his study, he barely noticed the reporter's voice at first. It was the image, just a single, lingering shot, that grabbed him. A boy no older than 9, standing alone by a rusted chain-link fence, arms folded tightly across a too-thin chest. The shelter behind him was shuttered, lights off, a padlock on the front gate. The boy didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He just stared into the camera, as if daring the world to turn away. Jonathan felt a coldness crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. He hadn't thought of the orphanage in Kansas in years, of the way the staff had called him too angry, the way foster homes had bounced him like a problem nobody wanted to fix. The boy on the screen, he had that same look, that same silent accusation. The next morning, Jonathan skipped his run, his reports, his calls. His driver was stunned when Jonathan insisted on going alone. 3 hours later, he stood in front of the shelter director, signing paperwork with the calm assurance of a man used to sealing billion-dollar deals. But this felt heavier. He returned home with 4 children. Not for charity, not for publicity. He didn't even tell his assistant. He did it because something in his chest had cracked open, because the silence in his mansion had grown too loud, because he couldn't bear the thought of another child growing up believing they weren't worth keeping. The house became a battlefield of bruised hearts, each room echoing with the subtle war between survival instincts and the fragile hope of permanence. Jonathan quickly learned that love, when it finally entered a life long starved of it, didn't arrive gently. It arrived clawing, biting, testing every inch of ground it was offered. Maya was the sharpest of them all. She came in like a blade, quick to cut, slow to trust. On her 3rd night, she jammed a fork into the garbage disposal and blamed Jonathan when it broke. When confronted, she screamed, "This place is just another cage. You're just another warden." Her eyes held that same quiet fury he remembered seeing in the mirror at 16. She wasn't angry at him, not really. She was angry at every adult who had promised safety and delivered nothing but abandonment. Jace was a ghost. He moved through the halls like smoke, barely making eye contact. He communicated only through drawings, violent, abstract sketches that depicted corporate towers collapsing, men in suits melting into monsters, silent children being swallowed by boardrooms. Jonathan once found a picture stuffed behind the radiator. It was a mansion, his mansion, burning to the ground. The detail was surgical. The fire was alive. Tasha was sugar on the surface, acid underneath. She laughed loudly, performed for guests like a circus act, but each smile was a plea for reassurance. "You like me now, but you'll leave too," she once whispered to the family therapist. She insisted on calling Jonathan Mr. Money with a sweetness so artificial it stung. When he asked her to stop, she shrugged and replied, "Isn't that why you got us? Tax write-off?" And Zeke, poor Zeke, trembled like a leaf at every raised voice. A slammed door sent him crawling under tables, teeth chattering. He refused to sleep in beds, slept curled on the rug near the vents where he could hide if danger came. One night, Jonathan found him trying to cut the tags off all his clothes. "So no one knows I belong here," he whispered, eyes wide. Jonathan didn't retaliate. He didn't retreat. He doubled down. He read trauma literature until his eyes burned. He learned the language of children broken too young. What it meant when Maya slammed a door wasn't defiance, but fear. When Jace didn't speak, it wasn't silence. It was mourning. When Tasha mocked, she was begging not to be forgotten. When Zeke screamed, it wasn't disobedience, it was memory. And Jonathan, who had once built empires through mergers and power plays, now waged a quieter war, one of dinners not skipped, boundaries not revoked, hugs not withheld. Love, he discovered, wasn't soft. It was persistent, fierce, unrelenting. And he intended to love them until they believed it was real. The fall came suddenly, not with a slow unraveling, but like a building collapse, loud, public, irreversible. One moment, Jonathan stood at the center of a stage, flanked by flashing cameras and polished executives. The next, he was on the floor, his face pale, his breath shallow, the future he'd built for decades slipping from his grasp as the audience gasped. The diagnosis came swiftly, mercilessly. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months. Maybe less. The kind of news that doesn't knock the wind out of you. It replaces your lungs entirely. Jonathan didn't tell the board. Not yet. Not while he still had time to leave things in order. But time, as it turned out, had other plans. Trevor Langston, the newly minted CEO, had always played the game with a gleaming smile and a knife tucked behind his back. Young, camera-ready, fluent in buzzwords. He had been the board's darling from the start. But Trevor didn't want to coexist with Jonathan's legacy. He wanted to replace it, erase it. One by one, the signs began to appear. The Jonathan Hargrove Innovation Lab became the Langston Tech Center. Scholarships bearing Jonathan's name were quietly discontinued. His charity-funded orphan education program was shelved for budget realignment. Even the marble plaque at the corporate headquarters, ripped out and replaced with a digital billboard broadcasting Trevor's personal branding initiative. Jonathan watched it all from his hospital suite, tethered to IV lines, a man diminished but not defeated. What cancer hadn't taken, betrayal threatened to. But Trevor had underestimated the one thing Jonathan had built that couldn't be bought, downsized, or rebranded. His children. When Maya heard the news, she didn't hesitate. She slammed her law books shut, marched into court, and began tearing through corporate loopholes with the same blade-sharp tenacity she once used to guard her heart. Her injunction was a masterpiece, strategic, blistering, and public. Jace's drawings surfaced days later. The man who held monsters went viral overnight. In haunting, stylized ink, he depicted a towering figure shielding 4 small children from wolves in suits. The internet called it fiction. But those who knew, knew. Tasha took the fight national. Her speeches, raw and unscripted, hit like truth-tipped arrows. This isn't just about one man. It's about what happens when good men are erased because they don't play dirty. She became a movement. And Zeke? Zeke found the rot buried deep in Trevor's digital closet. Money laundering, stock manipulation, private memos. With surgical precision, he cracked the vault open and laid it bare. By the time the board reconvened, they had no choice but to act. Trevor was ousted, disgraced, dismantled. Jonathan was reinstated, not in body, but in name, in truth, in legacy. He didn't have the strength to speak at the meeting that followed. But when Maya placed the court ruling in his lap, when Jace wheeled in a framed panel of his comic, when Tasha curled beside him whispering, "We got him, Dad," and Zeke squeezed his hand, Jonathan cried. Not out of pain, but because they had given him back everything that mattered. The house was quiet that morning, sunlight creeping gently across the mahogany floorboards, casting warm lines through the open doors of Jonathan's study. On the end table beside him sat a worn photograph, edges curled from years of handling. In it, 4 children stood barefoot on a California beach, tangled in seaweed, cheeks sticky with salt water, laughter suspended mid-frame. Zeke had been the one to take off running first, shrieking when a wave chased him back to shore. It was the first time they'd heard him laugh without panic beneath it. Jonathan's hand rested on the photo when the nurse found him. No monitors had sounded, no alarms had blared. He had slipped away with his eyes open, looking toward the light breaking through the window. His final moment still, complete. There were no final words, but none were needed. He'd said everything that mattered with how he had lived. News of his passing broke before noon. What followed was not the somber memorial of a corporate titan, but a gathering unlike any the world of finance had ever seen. Children poured in, dozens, then hundreds, some with foster parents, others who had aged out and come alone. Many clutched handwritten letters. A few brought flowers. Most just stood in silence, not for the CEO, for the man who had paid their college tuition without ever meeting them, for the man whose name had signed off on winter coats and therapy grants, for the man who remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. The funeral overflowed. Executives sat beside cafeteria workers. Therapists shared pews with janitors. A janitor from the original shelter stood and spoke. He didn't just save kids. He built a home for people who thought they'd never deserve one. 3 weeks later, the doors of the Hargrove Foundation for Child Justice opened to the public. It stood in the heart of Oakland, a building of clean glass and exposed brick, open walkways and rooftop gardens. Its mission was inscribed in steel above the entrance. Not everyone is born into a family, but everyone deserves to be fought for. Inside, Maya handled legal advocacy. Jace curated art programs for trauma recovery. Tasha led national policy reform. Zeke ran the data infrastructure, ensuring every child's name was accounted for, tracked, and protected. When asked why they did it, none of them mentioned legacy or inheritance. Tasha once said it best, standing on a school stage, addressing a room of wide-eyed teens. He didn't ask us to be grateful. He asked us to be brave, and to fight for every kid still waiting for someone to show up. And that's what they did, because Jonathan Hargrove hadn't just changed their lives. He had taught them how to change the world.